Tonight, we begin with medieval vegetables. I know, it doesn't sound thrilling, but these are not ordinary vegetables. So gently dim the lights, let the world slow down, and allow yourself to relax as we ease into tonight's journey together. Purslane was the kind of plant medieval authorities deeply distrusted, not because it poisoned people, caused riots, or worshipped the devil, but because it refused to behave like a proper crop. It didn't line up neatly in rows. It didn't wait for permission. It didn't even pretend to care who owned the land. Purslane simply appeared, like an uninvited guest who somehow knew how to cook better than expected. It thrived during drought, shrugged off poor soil, and quietly grew between stones, along roads, inside courtyards, and in places that made people pause and wonder how it was even possible. Medieval peasants didn't plant purslane. That would have required effort. Instead, they noticed it one day, realized it hadn't died despite everything working against it, and sensibly decided to eat it. This alone placed purslane several steps ahead of most medieval decision-making processes. Nutritionally, purslane was almost offensive. It was packed with vitamins, minerals, and healthy fats at a time when most diets consisted of bread, regrets, and whatever had been boiled long enough to stop resisting. It stayed green when respectable vegetables quietly collapsed under the pressure of reality. It required no fertilizer, no irrigation, no encouragement. It simply existed, which in medieval agriculture was considered suspicious behavior. And this is where things became uncomfortable. Food was supposed to come from fields. Fields were measured, fields were taxed, fields came with obligations. Purslane ignored all of that. It turned roadsides into pantries and stone walls into quiet grocery stores. No lord assigned it, no priest blessed it, no steward could count it without bending down and admitting a loss of control. So authorities did what people often do when faced with something useful but inconvenient. They called it a weed. Weed is not a scientific term. It is an emotional response. It simply means this plant works too well and refuses to follow the rules. Monastic gardens quietly grew purslane because monks appreciated food that didn't die out of spite. Medical texts praised it, healers relied on it, but peasants eating it freely felt dangerous. A peasant who didn't depend on grain was a peasant who didn't panic during shortages, and calm peasants have always made those in power uneasy. So purslane wasn't banned loudly, it was ignored deliberately, forgotten carefully, and mocked politely. Because destroying a plant that grows everywhere is difficult, convincing people it has no value is much easier. And purslane, stubborn as ever, continued growing anyway, patiently waiting for humanity to realize it had made a mistake. Salsify was never dramatic. It didn't demand attention or grow in proud, visible abundance. If you judged it only by what appeared above ground, you might assume it had already failed. It looked thin, unimpressive, and slightly apologetic, like a plant that already knew it wouldn't be taken seriously. Underground, however, salsify was quietly thriving. Its long, sturdy root reached deep into the soil, safely protected from frost, drought, grazing animals, and the chaos of medieval farming. While other crops panicked at the first sign of bad weather, salsify calmly continued its work below the surface, collecting nutrients and waiting patiently for someone wise enough to dig it up. Medieval peasants noticed this quickly. Salsify didn't need rich soil. It didn't demand constant attention. It didn't collapse emotionally during a cold snap. You planted it once and mostly forgot about it, which made it efficient, reliable, and, unfortunately, suspicious. Medieval agricultural systems favored visible effort. They preferred fields that could be inspected, counted, taxed, and admired by passing officials who needed to feel useful. Salsify hid. Half of its harvest stayed underground, invisible and difficult to measure. You couldn't easily threaten people with hunger when their food was quietly minding its own business beneath the soil. Even worse, salsify was nourishing. It provided energy, minerals, and enough sustenance to carry people through harsh winters without begging for grain from central stores. This was never part of the plan. Hungry, anxious people were easier to control. Medical writers praised salsify as strengthening and restorative, a compliment that only deepened suspicion. Food that heals people reduced their dependence on institutions that preferred being necessary. So salsify wasn't removed through force, it faded through neglect. It was labeled old-fashioned, unfashionable, something eaten only when better food wasn't available. Above ground, it remained modest and forgettable. Below ground, it fed people reliably year after year. And like many things in medieval history, it didn't disappear because it failed. It disappeared because it succeeded too quietly. Lovage was the medieval equivalent of someone who was good at everything and quietly resented for it. It was a vegetable, a herb, and a medicine all at once. Already too many roles for comfort. It flavored food, soothed digestion, eased pain, and returned year after year with calm confidence. It didn't require constant labor, it didn't suffer dramatically, it simply worked. Peasants loved it. It made bland meals gentler. It helped digestion after diets built mostly on bread and hope. It also reduced dependence on healers and monasteries, which was convenient for families and uncomfortable for institutions. Lovage grew tall and confident. It improved soil health, attracted helpful insects, and lived peacefully among neighboring plants. Crops were expected to struggle. Struggle justified hierarchy. A plant that made life easier quietly disrupted the narrative. Lovage was also associated with comfort, attraction, and emotional well-being, qualities medieval authorities found unsettling. Comfortable people asked questions, so lovage wasn't banned dramatically, it was slowly reframed as excessive, old-fashioned, or medicinal rather than culinary, something useful only in small, supervised amounts. Over time, lovage slipped into the margins, not because it was dangerous, but because it made people too comfortable. Skirret was sweet, starchy, and remarkably reliable. 3 traits medieval systems found troubling. It thrived in cold, wet soil and endured neglect with quiet patience. While other crops failed dramatically, skirrets kept growing underground, calmly meeting people's needs. It didn't demand constant care. It didn't panic during bad years. It simply appeared when food was scarce. Peasants relied on it. It filled bellies during shortages and reduced dependence on controlled grain supplies. Even elites enjoyed it, which created an awkward overlap. Medieval society depended on separation. Once skirrets became associated with both peasants and nobility, it was quietly reframed as old-fashioned and unsophisticated. Skirret didn't disappear because it was weak. It disappeared because it was dependable. Good King Henry wasn't named after royalty. It earned its name because medieval people often called things good right before deciding they were inconvenient. This plant grew near homes, along paths, and in forgotten soil where authority was weakest. Its leaves fed people, its shoots nourished them, its seeds provided flour in desperate times. One plant, many uses, very little effort. Food was supposed to come from land that could be measured and taxed. Good King Henry refused to cooperate. It returned year after year, reducing labor and dependence, and anything that reduced toil was quietly treated as rebellion. So it wasn't banned, it was rebranded as untidy, a weed, something respectable people no longer planted. It didn't fail, it was dismissed. Groundnut made authorities uneasy because it was clever. While respectable crops demanded attention above ground, groundnut hid nourishments below ground. It grew quietly, survived poor soil, and stored food discreetly. It reduced panic during shortages. Panic reduction led to calm thinking. Calm thinking led to inconvenient outcomes. Crops that couldn't be easily counted couldn't be easily taxed, so groundnut developed a bad reputation, not because it failed, because it worked without permission. Sorrel was sharp, sour, and honest. Its bright flavor cut through dull meals and briefly reminded people that food could be more than survival. It grew everywhere and helped preserve food, reduce illness, and improve health. Healthy people needed fewer interventions. Independent people needed less control. Medical warnings framed sorrel as excessive and unbalancing, a flexible accusation applied to many inconvenient things. Over time, sorrel was quietly pushed aside. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share it with someone who might appreciate it too. And for more stories like this, make sure to subscribe.